Well, hello there. It's time for another episode of Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, 1M5, The Iron Door. Music by John Williams, orchestrated by Herb Spencer. A very, very short queue here. And in fact, the next two really are very short indeed. But there's still a lot of interest, so I will go through it, basically. And this one, I've said, this particular peculiar cue is all gestural and atonal with small hints of diminished, but not necessarily octatonic harmony. One of the rare fully atonal JW moments, well, I say fully atonal, it doesn't necessarily mean 12 tone, which we'll find out later, but basically chromatic. And it has unusual instrumentation. We've got two bass clarinets, two tubas, a super ball, which is a sort of one of those balls that you might have thrown as a kid up against a wall, and it sort of continues. But if you put a stick in it and sort of glue it together, you can rub it on the outside of the rim of a tam-tam or gong. It makes a really unusual sound. He used it with things like E.T. and stuff like that. So a sort of device that was around since the sort of early-ish 20th century, I think 1930s maybe, that sort of thing. And then, interesting here, we've got the mid-range of the harmonic spectrum is sort of saturated with clusters. So in other words, sort of on the stave, we've got all of these sort of cluster things here. And then we've got sort of, a typical tritone bass thing. In other words, two notes which are a tritone apart, which he does quite a lot, actually, interestingly. And then a sort of bassy, sort of mid-mud additional mud in that sort of VC sort of range in the middle of the stave. But then you'll notice that actually right at the end we've got this sort of very, very high harmonic stuff, which allows the harp and the clarinet who are playing in unison to sort of come out of that. So it has this sort of very huge sort of cathedral-like atmosphere, basically, as well. Yes, originally I think it's had no time signature, but obviously if it's being done live, it has to have a time signature, else it doesn't work. It's been rewritten as 6/4, but in fact it's just a big pause, and the conductor would have just sort of conducted it live, really, to the picture, but with streamers and things. The instrumentation is strange. Well, actually, let's go through all of it, because I think also it warrants. We got two flutes, clarinet and B flat, two bass clarinets, which I will just put an additional clef in, because I'm doing this in C. So let's do that. Make it a bit bigger so we can all see it. And also do that just to get a little bit more on the page. There we go. Two bassoons, contrabassoon, so actually no bassoons in that bit. We can safely get rid of those. Two trombones, the third trombone, fourth trombone don't do anything. In fact, I think there's rarely a fourth trombone in the whole thing. So that's just sort of there. I think usually it's just three. And in this case, we've got two tubas. So those are doing the same thing as the contrabasses. There is a vibraphone which I've seen in a score, but I can't hear it at all on the soundtrack in any way whatsoever, so I'm not sure that it's actually there. So we've got a tam-tam as well, which is all of this sort of very low resonance sort of stuff going on, which is interesting. The Iron Door, I mean, yeah. There's a lot of sort of almost, not comic, but sort of onomatopoeic decisions that Williams makes about things. Which sort of give rise to musical ideas, and I wonder whether that's one of them. The fact it's iron and there's gongs and tam-tams and things to sort of hint at the knocking. It's all sort of very mysterious as well. The clusters are arranged thusly. So we've got basically semitones from G flat all the way down to A flat. With a little bit of sort of interlocking there with sort of violin 2 desk, the sort of inside desk doing sort of E flats I'm trying to work out how that would have been divided, because I think there were 12 violin twos, 14 1-1s, I think. But I will have to double check that. So easy for that, because that's just 5 and 5, then 4 each for those. So I think that's probably what would have happened. But yeah, always good to sort of like say who's playing what to save time in the session. And then we've sort of got interesting little harp bit as well, which sort of delicately supports this section here. But before we get into the orchestration in total, let's just sort of see what's going on. So we've got semitonal clusters. In fact, they're 9-tone semitonal clusters. So it's a 9-note or a 9 chromatic tone atonality at the beginning. We've then got, combined with that, an interesting sort of open position, sort of atonal chord here. So that's an F and then a B. Like that. So it really is an atonal chord. Basically a sort of 5Z38 with a 3-3 in the upper voicing. So not in its usual sort of 0811 configuration, but he does use those sorts of that 3-3. Basically, it's a minor dyad, a minor third, and a major third together, and then sort of combines them and puts them in different sort of inversions and things. But it's kind of meaningless because of the fact that there's already in this point 10-tone semitonal clusters, and he misses out a G sharp and an A. So we don't actually see the G sharp and A until a little bit later on here, sort of A flat and A in this, and they're all sort of gestural, sort of atonal type things. He often uses tritones as well, just to sort of make it even more sort of gnarly. And then right at the very end, he does this sort of really interesting, very chromatic pitch set, so 7-note pitch set at this point, combined with the fact that we've also got so it sounds almost tonic, but it's not quite. In fact, it's just chromatic. And then all of this at the end, we've got sort of pretty much full chromaticism as well. So in terms of the notes here, again, a sort of, let's call it a sonority. It almost certainly improvised, but it's interesting to see where it's from. So, and the thing is, knowing what pitch set it is doesn't really help us, particularly in this instance, because nothing else is sort of derived from it. It's only helpful really when, the whole sort of thing is based upon a specific sort of set class, or it's derived from an octatonic scale or a hexatonic scale, and it's difficult to kind of find out where it's from. That's where it gets useful. This is not really much use, but we'll do it anyway, because why not? It's quite fun. So here's my little thing. So I've got D flat, A flat, B, C, E, F. Make sure I have not put anything else, and we've already got B. So it's 6Z44. Well, that's helpful. I don't think there's anything special about 6Z44. But we shall find out. Oh, well, actually, there is. It's known as the Schoenberg hexachord. Well, I've seen that before, actually, interestingly. So if you sort of follow this, because it contains the pitches of Arnold Schoenberg, a lot of German and Austrian composers used to do this. Robert Schumann, for example, or Alban Berg, often used to devise little sort of ciphers and things like that. Dmitri Shostakovich, DSCH, that sort of thing, all over the place. So it's sort of one of those things. But it's also sort of a rather beautiful sonority as well. So that's a thing. But whether he devised it in that way, I don't know. There's no real way of knowing. But it's a rather sort of interesting chord because of the fact that on the piano there's a sort of interesting space between this bit and the space between this bit. So it's almost like a sort of micro explanation of what this is. By which I mean there's a lot of space between the lower notes and the mid-range, and there's a lot of high space. So in other words, there's high space, low space, and then there's sort of quite close and sort of symmetrical right at the middle, and it just makes quite a nice hand shape, really. And it's just one of those sort of you know, probably improvised, you know, from a jazz perspective. I always forget that, and I shouldn't, and I'm naughty, but it's you know, there's a lot of jazz influence in virtually everything that Williams writes. But this definitely a sort of atonal episode. But yeah, it's an interesting one to try to dissect this sort of thing, because it doesn't seem to be any sort of very specific type of you know, pitch set that he's sort of deriving everything from. It's almost entirely improvised, but there are certain things, that little hallmarks that sort of give it away as Williams. One of them is the 3/3. This sort of little voicing here, that sort of thing. There's also this sort of tritone type of idea as well. There's also these little gestures which sort of get gradually close and then end up on a unison in terms of the sort of pitch sets, like that. And then these sort of little special chords which sort of seem to sort of come out of nowhere as well. So there are those sorts of little hallmarks that he does tend to use. Let's have a look at the orchestration now. So really, the first thing is to do with texture. I mean, the whole thing is to do with texture. And the fact that there's a lot going on in this at a mid-range, and most of it is from this cluster here. So, you know, without it, it's very dull. So that's real sort of Penderecki, Lutosławski, but mostly Penderecki sort of territory. I'm sort of thinking of Threnody and all sorts of other things, maybe Ligeti as well, you know, those sorts of composers. And then combined with the low resonance of the gong, it sounds actually like almost like a cello that's playing at the beginning. If you listen closely, it sounds like there's a low hum. Yeah, that note. A sort of like a G sharp area, but I'm sure it's just a coincidental note from the rim of the gong or the tam-tam. And then we got this sort of two tubas playing very, very high, quite sort of awkwardly in their sort of very, very top register. Hence the quaver rest before they then have to go very low to B flat and E. Yeah, and this tam-tam then really secures the mud, really accentuates that mud, where we've got all of these notes. And with the tam-tam as well, like that. It really is that sort of rather special sort of almost, yeah, not quite sure what the words are really, but very sort of thick texture. And then we've got this sort of a little bit of bass clarinet and contrabass, and I can barely hear it. It is marked PPP as well. I mean, I can. There's almost an error in there, I think. No, actually not an error. It's just a bit loud. Now the strings. Yeah. And we also hear this wonderful sort of clarinet and harp combined. It's a sort of rather special sort of almost shadowing melody. Like that, as the sort of it drifts up to the higher strings on the harp as well. Really sort of magical. And with the artificial harmonics as well that we have here, played by enough instrumentalists of the LSO to make it sound really convincing. You can hear a little blemish of a B flat somewhere. Which I don't know where it's from, because nobody's supposed to be playing a B flat at that point. There's an A flat going on, so I'm not quite sure how that's possible. But there we go, a slight blemish in the recording of that. Yeah, I mean, what would be really interesting is, you know, it would have been fascinating if Williams had sort of matched the pitch set of that to the pitch set of this. I don't think he has. Again, we can just double check to see whether that is the case. I don't think it was, but we can double check. Let me just get rid of those highlights there. So we got, if I reset here, B flat on A sharp and E, which is from this sort of held thing. We've then got A sharp again, B and C. So if I do B and C, you'll see how it's sort of very semitonal. Then we've already got the C. There's an A flat in there. There is another A flat and a D as well. So none of the actual notes, or very few of the actual notes from there. What does it make? 621. So it's another hexachord, but this time it's a different sort of hexachord. So if we go to 621, don't think it's any sort of relation with it particularly. In fact, there are two different versions anyway. So OG3 468, you can see it's sort of pretty gnarly. That 2 3 4 in the middle are semitones essentially, and then tones either side. So yeah, I mean, it's unrelated, but nonetheless a sort of really interesting cue at that point, and kind of fascinating in terms of its orchestration with all of this sort of divisi stuff. Must be quite difficult to do, but I suppose if it's all semitonal clusters, it's sort of not too bad, and it's very short anyway, so it's easy to retake. Anyway, that is the Iron Door, a short one today, and an even shorter one next time when we move on to the next cue. Bye for now.